Wendy J. Haney, and welcome to my channel. Today, I'm going to show you how to make an iron caddy. Ironing board caddy, I should say. And you're thinking, huh? An ironing board caddy? Yeah, it's really kind of cool. Basically, it's a long piece of fabric that's quilted, and then it has pockets on it. So you put it over the end of your ironing board, and then you have a pincushion so that if you're like me, I often go from my sewing machine over to my ironing board, and if you haven't figured it out yet, I pin a lot. So I go over on my ironing board. Of course, then I have all these pins I'm taking out of things. So I could put them in my pincushion there. But then, actually, I end up having a magnetic thing on my ironing board. So that works fine too. But the cool thing is it has pockets. So oftentimes laying on my ironing board, and I'm pushing it out of the way and shoving it out of the way when I'm trying to iron something larger, is scissors. Because once again, I may trim something over there instead of taking it back to the cutting board and using a rotary cutter. So I often have scissors. So this way, the ironing board, it would lay something like that, where your pincushion, I will show a picture. It's really not showing very well here in the video. I'll have Kevin put a picture up here so you can see it. But essentially, your pincushion is at the top. And I'll admit, I maybe should have put my pincushion a little taller. Don't know, we'll see. And then it has pockets to put whatever I want that has a tendency to be on my ironing board. So my scissors are a good one. Now, after having made one of these, I actually wish this large pocket on the front was a tad shorter. Because the other thing I'm always losing, yep, is my purple thing. And often I sew something going over to the ironing board, flip it out, and I want my purple thing. And it gets lost. So it would be really cool to put that in my pocket there. But guess what? It gets lost in there because my pocket is taller than my purple thing. So I might want my pocket to be a little smaller, maybe an inch. Yeah, my cutter's over there. My guess is an inch smaller, and I would be happy with it. And that way, my purple thing would stick out the top and I don't lose it. And the same with maybe smaller scissors you have. So I'm going to walk you through how to do this all, but feel free to do a little experimenting with the devices, the things that you have on your ironing board that you feel would be handy to put in this little caddy, and do a little measuring to determine, well, do I want my pocket smaller or not? I actually don't think you're going to want it bigger. That would surprise me if you do, but you might want it a little smaller. Now, with that said, interesting about this pattern is that it also has a pocket on the other end. And that pocket is much smaller. So, depending on what you've got going on, you could flip them. So in this case, my purple thing fits perfectly. But my large scissors, not so much. It would kind of fall out of there. Now, I have a lot of little scissors, so maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll flip my caddy around. I won't have the pincushion on the top, and the pincushion is put on with hook and loop tape, so I could just remove that and not use it. So that's what I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that's what I might do. Maybe I'll flip this around and put this small pocket in the front. So there we have it. So I'm going to walk you through making this caddy. Now, when you look at the pictures of this caddy, you'll realize mine's probably, well, not probably, it is definitely longer than what I'm going to show you by, I don't know, 8 inches or so, because I don't have a regular ironing board that has a fairly small end on it. I have an ironing board that is, about 22 inches by, I don't know, 5 feet maybe, something like that. It's 4 feet, 4.5. I don't know. I know it's 22 inches wide and it's longer. So of course I knew that I needed this to be longer so that it wrapped down the sides. So if you happen to have an ironing board that is not your standard size, do a little measuring and compensate. The width will still be the same, but when I tell you the length to cut your front, your back, and your batting for the primary caddy piece, make it as long as you need it. Personally, I would go a little longer just in case, and that's what I did. Basically, I just did the width of my fabric, I think, on this one and just went with it. So that's what we have it. So I'm gonna show you how to make this ironing board caddy. Well, now that I've babbled on enough about the caddy and what you can or can't do it, blah, 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 let's get started. Okay, so what you're going to need is, hold this over here, is your main fabric for your caddy. And I'm gonna tell you, I just went to my stash and found what I could. So, you know what? If you wanna go shopping, find something fancy, go for it. But basically, I found a light piece of fabric that I thought, that'll work fine. And that's going to be 8.5 by 36.5. That's the general size to fit a standard ironing board. With that said, maybe you just want to start with the width of fabric and then you can always trim it at the end to the size you want. Then on the back, you're going to need the same size piece of fabric. I didn't want to waste a bunch of this fabric, so I have a whole freaking slew of muslin. You're not going to see the back anyway, so I went with muslin on the back. Then you're going to need 2 pieces of fabric, or go with the same piece of fabric. It doesn't matter. Once again, went to my stash bin. You need, for the large pocket up front, a piece that is 6.5 by 8.5, and the small pocket that's generally meant for the back is 4 by 8.5. So you might have scraps for that or use the same piece of fabric. Then you're going to want some type of accent fabric around the edge. All of this can be your choice. The key thing with the accent fabric, it is the binding, but it's also, you'll note, the top of the pockets. And it's the inside of the pocket, which you really can't see. But the way this pattern works is you put your batting in your pocket, you put the top on, the batting, and the backing, and the way you roll it, you end up with this nice little, well, binding, for lack of a better word. And you really can't see it very well in that color, but you can here. Kind of a binding on the top of your pockets. So that's what you need for the main caddy. Then we have the pincushion. Pincushion, you can do whatever you want. Once again, I went to my scrap bin because I needed 8 2-inch squares. So I went with that. And then I just went with the accent fabric on the back of my pincushion. Do whatever you want, go for it. It really doesn't matter. That's the cool thing about this. Mix, match, do what works for you and what you have on hand, you know? Then you need hook and loop tape. Basically that V stuff, which I can't say on YouTube, so you need hook and loop tape because that is what's gonna secure your pincushion to this. Now, if you're not a type of person that needs a pincushion on your ironing board, because if you're like me and you got this handy dandy metal dish, leave off the pincushion. Doesn't matter because actually it's really easy to add that later if you decide you want it. Not a problem adding that at the end. Okay, so that is what we need. So I'm going to set this aside. So here is my hook and loop tape that I need. You need about 1 inch by 3.5. These are pretty handy. They're actually, I have a package of them that are 2 inches wide by 4 inches wide, and they have sticky on the back. Makes it so easy to put these on. So I just cut a pair of them in half, So now I have a 1 inch by 4 inch set. Okay, now, as I said, we're gonna start with the easy stuff. And some of this I've already cut out. So my accent fabric, there's my binding. For your binding, you need 3 2.5 inch by width of fabric strips, and that fits a 36.5 inch caddy. Obviously, you'll need more if you do what I did and went with the longer caddy. Okay, so be aware of that when you're figuring out how much fabric you need. Then I have my fabric for the small pocket, and this I need a 4 by 8.5 inch piece. This is my large pocket, and I need a 6.5 by 8.5 inch piece. And then for the back, and these are already cut. These here, I'm going to have to cut these and get ready. They got pulled out of my stash. These two accents, so this is the top of the pocket that looks like a binding. You need a piece that is 5 by 8.5 and 7.5 by 8.5. And those are gonna work in with our other pockets. And I'm not gonna show you how I cut these pockets out because that'll be rather boring. Basically, you know, get your ruler out and actually, hang on. I have, oh, fiddlesticks. Of course I can't find it. I actually have, wonder where it went, an 8.5 inch square ruler, which is perfect for this. Therefore, you know, I just put this on here. So this one needs to be 8.5 by 6.5. So there we go. There's my 8.5, there's my 6.5. I would just cut. Okay, let's just do this. And I'm gonna just cut up there because this is gonna end up going back in my scraps. And I'm double checking what I need because I keep cutting this wrong. So there's my 8.5, my 6.5, double check, large. And actually, like I said, I'm actually thinking I might trim this down a tad smaller since I'm making a second one. So there we go. So I've got that one cut out and I'm gonna cut out the teal one as well. Okay, so there we go with that. Then our primary fabric, whoopsie, oh, yeah, I'll get to the batting in a minute. So our primary fabric needs to be 8.5 by, sorry, grabbing my rulers over here. This primary fabric needs to be 8.5 by 36.5. Now, this is a pretty serious, this is wider than most fabrics. So this is actually about, yeah, this is about a 46-inch piece of fabric folded in half. So it's pretty wide. So it's gonna give me way more length than I need. But cutting the width fabric is the easiest. And as you can see, it is seriously not straight. So we're going to, so the key thing is you want this straight. So we're gonna just move this over. So I've got this ruler here that's gonna get me at the edge of my fabric and give me straight. And then I put my other long ruler over here on this side, making sure it covers all the fabric all the way to the top. And once again, it's a large piece of fabric, so it doesn't fit on my screen, my video. And now we move that and I get a nice straight cut on that fabric, okay? Now, I have this lovely 6-inch ruler. Fabulous, but haha, I need an 8.5 inch strip of fabric. So now that I know I have it straight here, I can take this, put it over here. That gives me my 6 inches, which means this ruler, I need to line up with the bottom and the edges. And it doesn't need to go all the way to the top because all it is the placement to get this ruler. I have a little shadow thing going on with that. Sorry, there we go. We'll get rid of that. So I need it so that this ruler, I still want it nice and straight at the bottom and making sure it butts up against that. Yep, so it should be straight here, got that on my edge, but this up against that, that means when I cut, I've got my 6-inch, 7, 8.5. That means I'm gonna get an 8.5-inch strip. That is perfect. Okay, there we go. Now, I personally prefer, in this case, even if I was using a standard width of fabric, which is gonna be about 42 inches, I'd probably just work with that, especially if I had both backing and front, that I had enough fabric. I would work with that and not trim it down to the length I want until the end. That way, well, then I can test things out and make sure it works before I start shortening it up. Because you know what? You can shorten and you can't lengthen. So I'm gonna go cut my backing the exact same size, and then we'll look at what we need for batting. Before we get to the batting, I forgot the pincushion fabric. Yep, you're going to need 8 2-inch squares of fabric. Well, I have this bin of 2.5-inch wide pieces of fabric. Yep, I'm one that I finally started as I finish projects or, get done with a piece of fabric and go, oh, yeah, that's a strip of fabric, and like my accent fabric. Yep, I trimmed off some pieces and I'm like, okay, how wide is that? Oh, it's 2.5. I square it up. Okay, don't square it up, but I trim it up so it's 2.5 inches wide and it goes in this bin. So basically, when I needed my 2-inch squares for the pincushion, I came to this bin and just started picking through it until I found fabrics that I liked. Now, if I didn't find any I liked, I would probably go to the next bin, which is my 3 to 3.5 inch or whatever. I would go through my bin and find the scraps that I needed. And then, as I said, the back, I just used the same fabric as my accent fabric, which is my purple, and that needs to be a 3.5 by 6.5 inch piece of fabric. Okay, so now that you've got your fabric, hopefully now we've got all our fabric cut out. Now the last pieces that you need are your batting. So this is a quilting project. You're gonna get to quilt. Well, kind of, sort of. Really easy, just don't worry about it, is we need batting. I have a tendency to keep batting. Yeah, oops, I keep losing my pieces of paper here. Sorry about that. I have a tendency to keep batting. If it's a big enough piece that I go, maybe a table runner, I will keep it because you never know. And projects like this are why I keep it. So you're going to need a cut of, for your pockets. So one piece is 8.5 by 5. The other is 8.5 by 5, 8.5 by 7.5. And then you're gonna need a piece for your pincushion, which I realize I didn't cut out yet, which is 3.5. Sorry, I'm referring to my notes here. 3.5 by 6.5 for your pincushion. So your pockets, your 2 pockets, and your pincushion need small pieces of batting. So go dig through what you have. Hopefully you're like me and you save stuff. But then we need a big piece. This is going to be your caddy, and it needs to be 8.5 inches wide by 36.5 inches, or whatever length you decided to make your caddy. So as I mentioned, I am doing longer than 36 and a half. So I have, this is a big piece of batting. Not big enough for a quilt though, but decent size. I could have used it for a table runner. This doesn't need to be fancy batting. So whatever you have laying around that you go, you know what? I wouldn't cut into a piece that is big enough that I could use for a quilt or a baby quilt. But then again, I wouldn't go out and buy any either. Anyway, side note. So this is a big length. I just folded it in half. And then, is my ruler? That ruler's not quite big enough. And you know what? Batting, you don't need to worry so much about, I don't know, the direction and all sorts of things. But if you fold it in half to cut it, you are going to want it to be square. So I'm gonna actually square this up, or at least give myself a straight edge. Whoops, 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 whoops. Batting is so much fun to cut. Not. Okay, so we've got that. I'm gonna flip this back around. Okay, yep, batting's kind of a pain in the butt, I'll have to admit. But once again, what do I have here? This is about, I have this really long fun ruler that's 2.5 inches wide, 24. This is about a 48-inch strip of batting. And as I said, the fabric I'm working with, the width of fabric is, what did I say, like 46 maybe? So I'm gonna just cut this and use it as is. I will trim it up later. Okay, so once again, let's not deal with that one. Actually, we can use this fun ruler. So there's my 2.5. There's my 2.5. Actually, let's do it this way. Oh, no, that won't work. Oh yeah, well, there we go. There we go. Basically, this is my 6-inch ruler. I need another 2.5 inches. So we're gonna just use the big ruler on this side and my 2.5 inch here. And there we go. There's my 8.5. There. There. Now I have my 8.5 inch strip. I am going to square up one end of it. And this is the end that I'll be using, well, on the squared up end of my caddy. Okay, now we have everything cut out that we need. Now we're gonna start putting things together. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna put the caddy together. And what that means is, as I said before, I still just went with muslin for the back because I had it. Why not use it? And I have a stinking ton of it. Then muslin is great to have on hand for backs of wall hangings. It's inexpensive, and since a wall hanging isn't going to be seen. So take your backing, right side down. And I know, muslin, you can't exactly tell right side from wrong side unless I look at the, nope, really can't tell. So right side down, put your, and my muslin is actually a tad wider than it needs to be, it appears, which is fine. And let's use my square end. This is my squared up edge of my backing. And this is my squared up edge of my batting. Yeah, looks like I must have trimmed my backing a little wider, which is fine. As long as you line up one edge, you're good. So then basically just stretch this out, whether you do it on a floor or whatever. I totally did. Okay, then once you've got your batting sitting on top of the wrong side of your back, then you're going to put your top on. So you want the top of your caddy fabric right side up. Yep, I definitely cut my backing, or maybe I forgot I hadn't trimmed it. But anyway, that's okay. It really doesn't matter. Then you're going to put your top of your caddy fabric right side up. Now, here is when you're going to quilt it. Now, if you love doing all over quilting designs or something fancy and you're familiar and comfortable with that, go for it. Those of you that are not and are going, quilting it, don't worry. So what I discovered to do, and I'm going to actually remove my top from here first because it's actually easier to do this when it's not sitting on top of my batting, is this is an 8.5-inch strip, which means the middle is 4 1/4. And I'm going to get, I love my fusion markers, especially for this. So I'm going to mark a center line of 4 1/4. So there's my center. Then take my ruler, and I'll use this one because most of you will have a ruler this size, and I line up the top. This is the even edge that I squared up, and my other edge should be square, so I should be able to put my ruler on here and have it, excuse me, line up 4 1/4 inches all the way down. And then I'm going to mark it. Here's my center line with my fusion. Now, make sure you've already ironed your top, because once you use a fusion pen to mark this, you don't want to be ironing it or you will lose this. So now I have a line in my center, and I'm going to do that all the way to the bottom, okay? Then what I want to do is I found that about a 2.5-inch width quilting lines, it's a nice width. And so basically we are marking where you're going to quilt. And you're just going to use a walking foot. If you don't have a walking foot, I think you'll be just fine if you use a standard sewing foot. You're just going to be going through 2 layers of fabric and the batting. So as I said, we're marking where you're going to stitch for your quilting. That's why this is so easy, even for somebody that's not familiar with actually quilting something. So you decide how wide you want your lines. Maybe, so mine, let's see if you can see it. There. Mine are 2.5 inches apart. There's the center, and there's my 2.5 inches. Maybe you want them closer together. That's okay. Whatever you want is fine. So I'm gonna actually, I'm gonna switch to I have this big hunkin' long. This is a 36.5-inch by 2.5-inch ruler. I love it for things like this. So I'm gonna just mark all the way down on both sides of my center. So basically, I'm going to end up with, yep. So I have marking lines. There's my center, 2.5 inch here, 2.5 inch there, and then here will be my seams. So I have less than 2.5 inch here, so it'll work out just fine. So with that said, then once I have all of this marked, then I put my layers back together. My backing, whoops, that's the wrong end. My backing, my batting, making sure you have at least two edges that line up. As I said, I obviously had not finished trimming up my backing. And then you put your top on it and you're good. Excuse me. Now, what I also could have done is, given the fact that my backing is slightly larger, I could just put my batting in the middle of it And then line up my top with the batting. And then we can just trim the edges of the backing when we're done. Sometimes when you quilt, it does kind of, make things, tighten things up. Either way, it works. Hopefully you cut yours off the same size and you have 3 pieces of fabric that are exactly 8.5 wide by the length you want. And so I'm gonna go finish marking this and putting it all together. And then I have some larger pins. And I also have my handy dandy binder clips. So in this case, what I would do is I go all the way around the edge and I put my binder clips on. That keeps my edge nice and neat all the way around. And then, you probably don't need to pin it, but I've got some extra wide, they're kind of longer pins than usual, and I'm just gonna go and pin them in the middle here. This is gonna keep everything secure. Now, if you don't have binder clips, just go ahead and pin on the edge. Then we're gonna go to the sewing machine once you get it all marked and pinned, and you're gonna take and stitch directly on the lines that you just marked on your fabric. And that way, if you have a walking foot, great, that will work really well for this. If you don't, go ahead and give your regular machine a fine. It should manage it fine. This is, especially if you're not going with heavier fabric or really heavy batting. What I do is I increase my stitch length for my quilting. Normally my machine is set at 2.5. I bump it to 3.5 for my quilting. And so then we're just gonna go and we're gonna stitch on that, making sure you kind of keep these pins out of the way. So as you're moving along, get these pins popped out. So one, you don't stab yourself. So that's why I would highly recommend that you have the pins pointing up, and that's the end you start with. Otherwise, if they're pointing down and you're moving along, well, yeah, you could get jabbed. So there we have it. So I'm gonna go finish marking, pinning, and then I'm going to get this quilted. And then we're gonna come look at the pockets. I have finished quilting my lines. I took it to the ironing board and ironed it, which meant my red lines disappeared. And as I said, my back was actually larger than I needed, which was no big deal. I just left it that way. And now I'm gonna trim it up. And that's where my handy dandy, super, super long, 36.5 by 2.5 inch ruler comes in handy. Basically, I'm going to just put this along the edge of my fabric, which should be straight. And I know, I'm off the screen. There we go. Trim that up, and then I'm gonna bring it back over here and finish that up. So now I have nice trimmed up edges. I already squared up both ends of my fabric, so as I get done with the pockets, I can figure out what I'm gonna do and how long I'm gonna have it. So right now it is, about 45 inches. Okay, let's do the pockets. Oh, one side note on your cutting mat. If you're cutting batting, if you have an old mat, get it out and cut your batting on that. Otherwise, cutting batting on cutting mats kind of makes a mess. I'm gonna have to definitely take this off and clean it when I'm done. Okay, pockets. So I actually trimmed my pockets down by 1 inch, my large ones, per my discussion earlier. But what we have is for each pocket, we have an accent fabric, our small pocket, our medium, our large pocket in front. We have the front of the pocket for both of them, and we have a piece of batting. The batting is going to be the size of your accent fabric. Okay, you're going to do the exact same thing on both pockets for the most part. So I'm going to show you how to do it on one, and I'm going to tell you go do the same thing on the other pocket. What you're going to do is put your batting down first. You're going to put your accent fabric on top of the batting, right side up, and then put your accent or your the front fabric for your pocket right side up. This is batik, so you really can't tell the difference. But here we've got our batting, our accent fabric, and so you can tell the difference there. Well, kind of, sort of. We're going to put the pocket on top. Okay? Now, you can't, I mean, obviously you can tell you're not covering, you've got your smaller piece up front. This is okay. So what we're going to do is, yes, I'm going to pin it. Things get slippery with the batting. So we're going to pin this because you're going to sew this bottom seam, the seam where your batting, your accent, and your pocket all come together. And I take that back. I just told you incorrectly. My apologies. Your fabric on the top needs to be right side down. That would have been not a happy thing to do. My apologies there. Really doesn't matter with my batik. But here we go. Yep, you're going to want your pocket fabric right sides together with right sides of your accent fabric. Okay, now back to pinning, because what we're going to do is I would suggest you do this on both pockets at the same time, because then what we're going to do is we're going to take them to the sewing machine and you're going to sew the seam where you have all 3 layers of fabric. Okay, so I did do both pockets. So we're going to take these to the sewing machine and sew on the seam, the long seam, the long seam that has all 3 layers of fabric. We're going to take that to the machine and get that stitched up. Now that you have your seam on your pockets, you're going to flip it over so the batting is up. And this is where you're going to get out your good shears. This is why I always say, you know, we use rotary cutters for so many things, but having a good pair of scissors, good shears, comes in handy for this. What we want to do is trim that batting on the other side of the seam away from the big seam over here so we don't have as much bulk. This is a little tricky, I'll admit. And so maybe you want to flip it over and take this seam and like finger press it away from the batting. Actually, now that I think about it, that's a really good idea. Then get your shears and just trim, making sure you're not cutting the fabric behind it. Yep. Now, that idea of folding it back, well, in that case, maybe it is easy enough to get, get your rotary cutter out. This is what happens when I do things a couple times. I find different ways that comes in handy. So by moving that fabric back here, I was able to use my rotary cutter to trim that batting, making sure not to cut your seam. There we go, because we're going to fold this over and we want to eliminate some of the bulk. Okay, so now that that's done, flip it over and finger press that seam, opening out those, your front of your pocket and your inside of your pocket. Then what we're going to do is here, it's a little odd, but you're going to take your fabric with your pattern that's the front facing side of the pocket, and you're going to put that seam, that edge of the fabric, all the way down to the bottom of the batting. See? So there's your batting, and we're going to fold that fabric all the way over. And you're going, well, wait a minute. No big deal here. And I would highly suggest I finger press that. Press it with the iron before you do this step. So then what happens is when you do that, it folds over part of the back, the accent fabric of your pocket, and basically kind of gives you a edging at the top of your fabric, which is exactly what we have here. So you can see it easier on this fabric than the other one. So this is my small pocket. I already pressed it. I then folded that over. So my small pocket face front is at the edge of the batting, and then I pressed it. And I'm gonna do the same thing with my large pocket there. Then we're gonna pin it, because now it's a good time to use, we're gonna do a basting stitch. So you can use your 2.5 or whatever your default setting is on your machine, or put it back at that 3.5 when you did the quilting. Oh, which is a good reminder. You went and you quilted the Caddy, and I had you bump your seam length to 3.5 for your quilting. Remember to switch it back to 2.5 or whatever the default is when you sew this seam. If you don't, at the end of the world, don't panic, no big deal, but try and remember to do that. And for this project, I pretty much put the walking foot on my machine and I used it for everything because, well, yeah, you need it for your quilting for the Caddy piece, and then most of the pieces, yeah, almost all the pieces after that have batting involved. So just leave your walking foot on and use it for everything. So I'm gonna go and we're going to stitch, about 1/8 of an inch in. All we're doing is basting this, both of these to make sure they're held secure, okay? Let's go do that. Okay, I put my basting seam in. The other thing that you want to do is stitch in the ditch to secure kind of that binding, that top edge of your pocket. I've been using cream colored off-white thread for everything because of using off-white for my Caddy and my quilting. I really didn't want my quilting to stand out. It was just more of securing things and everything else I've been doing. But now that I'm working with actually stitching on my fabric such that I would see it, and even the stitch in the ditch, sometimes I'm not perfect, and you can see, yeah, like right there, you can see where I stitched. So I switched to purple thread. I switched to a thread that, well, was not going to be very visible. Now, I'm going to show you, I'm going to stitch here to secure this pocket, and it's like, I'm okay having my purple line in here. Okay. So stitch in your ditch right there at the top edge of your pocket. I went and switched to a 3.5 inch stitch length. If you forget, no worries. Now we're going to attach our pockets to our Caddy. Okay, there's our Caddy. So this is the top end. You want your top fabric up if you happen to use a, basic fabric on the back, like I did. So have your good fabric up, and you're going to position your large pocket on the left-hand side. Though you know what? I don't think it really matters. Either way, start with one of them. But this is my primary one. And now would be a perfect time for you to think about what do you want to have in your pockets at your ironing board? So you can decide, in this case, I will probably do it really simple, and I will stitch a line right here down the center of this. I will, do it even and put it right there so I have two pockets. Or, I talked about, my purple thing. I keep losing that thing. I think I took it over to the sewing machine. But maybe I want to stitch right here and have one little pocket for my purple thing, because I did shorten this pocket. So my purple thing would stitch out stick out at the top. Or, let's see, I don't want to, if you're like me, oops. The other thing that often ends up at the ironing board is a seam ripper. Yep, so, okay, I want my seam ripper in there. Either way, figure out what you want in there, what's going in your pockets, and if you want more than 2 pockets, because I really would suggest you at least put a seam down the middle to get 1 pocket, or get 2 pockets. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna pin, your pocket to your caddy, matching up the edges all the way around. And in this case, once again, it's kind of more of a basting stitch again, because you're just securing it on it. When you actually sew on the binding, that is where you're gonna really stitch everything down. So with that said, I would still use kind of a coordinating color if you want, in case that happens to stick out. And then stitch your pocket. So, ruler, off to my right all the time. So your pocket is 8.5, so it means your center is 4 1/4. I always like to mark mine, and this is not gonna show up really well just because it's red on purple, but I don't wanna use one of my non-iron off pens, because I don't want to have to worry about trying to get it out and having it, be there. So this will be dark enough for me to see. Yep, I can see it. That's where I'm going to go stitch to create my 2 pockets. Okay, now go get that done. Figure it out. Then what I would highly suggest you do is take this to your ironing board and figure out what length do you need it. Hey, standard ironing board, go with the traditional size of 36.5 inches. So measure out your caddy, cut 36.5, you're good to go. For me, I have a 22-inch ironing board, so I wanted it longer. So I messed with it. In fact, I'm gonna go double check that maybe I want this one longer than I did the last one. And then once you figure out your length, cut it, leave it, whichever, then you're going to put the smaller pocket on the opposite side. Yep, you're gonna do the exact same thing. Decide if you want more than 1 pocket. Once again, I'm just gonna put a stitch down the middle and call it good with 2 pockets. And I'm gonna pin, and then I'm gonna baste these together. And then for the most part, we've kind of got the primary part of the caddy done, and we're gonna move on to the pincushion. There we have it. Now, a few things to mention. Sorry, should have mentioned it before. You're going to want to back stitch at the top of your pocket lines that you're putting in. And I found it easiest to start at the bottom. So under the sewing machine, I started at the bottom with my stitching. I get to the top, and make sure here you put in a back stitch to hold that secure. Otherwise, that is going to come loose. I found my purple thing, and after playing with my pockets, I realized, yes, the purple thing does now stick out of the top. It does, but if it gets turned, it's gonna get lost in there. So I decided to throw in 1 more pocket that's specifically for my purple thing, just like a pen holder. Therefore, it's gonna stay there and not fall down and get lost. At least that's what the goal is. Okay, so now you've got it. You've got your both ends done. Make sure you're happy with it. And now we're gonna do the pincushion. Now, this piece is optional. If you're like me who really doesn't use a pincushion like that at my ironing board, and you use your magnetic pin holder like I do, then don't put on a pincushion. No big deal, but we're gonna walk you through it. So I got my 8 2-inch squares. I used basically my accent fabric, my back pocket, my front pocket, and then I found a few other pieces that coordinated well with it. Do whatever you want. Go totally scrappy. Then you're gonna just lay it out and figure out what you want to do with it. Da, 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 da. There we go. Okay, I'm happy. Okay, there we go. I have the layout for my pincushion top. I decided to go with the fabric for the back, the same as my front pocket, and with 3.5 by 6. Yes, 3.5 by 6, and the same size cut of batting. So now what you're gonna do is you're gonna sew these all together. I suggest you sew them in a row. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flip this over there, flip this over here. I'm gonna sew those, and then I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna do the next one. Basically, I'm gonna sew that row so I have this row together and this row together. Then, once we have that done, then we're gonna wanna press it in a way to make the seams nest nicely. Now that you have your 2 rows of your pincushion done, then you're gonna take it to the ironing board and you're gonna press the seams in the opposite direction. So the top, I pressed to the left, and the bottom I press to the right. The benefit of doing this is that way, when you're going to sew this final seam, you're going to match your seams, your little squares together, and your seams are going to nest very, very nicely. Yep, they're going to be opposite directions, which means they nest very nicely and they don't overlap and get really bulky with the seams all pressed the same direction. So if you do that, stitch your 1/4 inch, you're gonna have the top of your pincushion. Now, we need to quilt it. Yep, you're going to take the top of your pincushion, we're gonna assume it's already together, and you're gonna put it on top of that batting that you cut 3.5 by 6. So that it fits on top of there, and then you're gonna quilt this. You can quilt it however you want. Do a zigzag all over pattern. I just stitched in the ditch. Once again, I got my walking foot out. I'm lucky I do have a stitch in the ditch foot that goes on my walking foot. I've got somewhat purple coordinating thread, and I just stitch in the ditch. Bingo, we're done, okay? So go ahead and do that. Get your seams, your top done, put it wrong side on top of the batting and quilt it how you want. Then we're gonna take the back of the pincushion, which is 3.5 by 6, and we're gonna attach the hook and loop tape. And as I said, I have a piece that is 1 inch by 4 inch. You could go 1 inch by 3.5. Use what you've got. I'm really lucky that it has sticky on the back of it, which makes it super, super easy to put it on top of here. And let's see, which way did I do it? I put the loop. I guess you'd call it the loop. No, this would be the tape maybe. I don't know. I don't think it really matters which you put which. But this is not the fuzzy one. The fuzzy one goes on your ironing board. But you know what, like I said, I don't think it really matters. So I'm gonna take off, I'm gonna separate them out. Yep. And I'm going to basically take the sticky back off this. And I think most of these days comes with sticky back, which makes this super, super easy. And slap that sucker in the middle. There we go, it's stuck. But you, there goes my notes. You know how much sticky stuff, well, gets unsticky once in a while. So you're gonna go to the sewing machine and you're gonna just sew right around the edge and secure this tape, loop, whichever, hook, tape, to your, the back of your pincushion. So then you'll have your pincushion top quilted and your bottom ready to go. Now that you have your top of your pincushion all quilted and ready to go with the batting, and you have the back of the pincushion with your, I'm going to call it the loop tape, secured on it. Make sure you do back stitching on that. Now you're ready to put your pincushion together. The bottom of your pincushion, right side up with the loop tape. Then put your pincushion on top of it. That's the easiest way to make sure you get that right. And if you want, flip it over. That's fine. So then, yeah, I'm going to leave it this way. Then we're going to pin it. Make sure we keep everything secure. Now, we need to put something in this pincushion, right? Now, you could, once you're done, so here's the key thing, is make sure you leave a space, about 3 inches. So for me, the easiest thing is to mark it with this, because even if I put pins right there, I have a tendency to forget to stop. So I have red marks there. So I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch around my pincushion to secure it, leaving about a 3-inch gap to fill it. Now, you can fill it with polyester batting stuff that you get in a bag that people stuff stuffed animals with. If you've got leftover batting like this, just ball it up and put it in there. That works fine too. I'm actually partial to actually having a pincushion that has, I don't know, I like the feel of one like your good old-fashioned mothers, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, whoever's pincushions that have like, I don't know, what would you call it? Like seeds in there. Don't you love, like a beanbag? That's it, it's like a beanbag. Anyway, I like that and prefer that. So, totally up to you. But the perfect thing for filling a pincushion is walnut seeds, walnut shells, ground nut shells. This is, you can go scented. I'm pretty much an unscented person when it comes to things like this. This is called Plum Easy Patterns Perfect Pincushion Filling Unscented Ground Nut Shells. Yep. It's just nice. Yeah, it's like a beanbag. So once you get your pincushion made and you've got your opening, then I think the easiest thing to do is take this bag, put it in a, I don't know, a measuring cup. Yeah, a measuring cup that has a pourer on it, and then pour into your pincushion. Then what you do is you got to make sure you, actually what I would do is after you get the edges pressed, you're going to flip it inside out and then press your seams. So your seams are nice and pressed before you attempt to fill it. And then we're going to fill it. And then once you fill it and get it at, you know, you don't need it overfilled, you know, fill it with what's good that you can easily handle it. And then what you're going to do is the edge that has the opening, you're going to need to whip stitch it. And I've tried to demo that in a video, and it doesn't work very well because my hands get in the way of what I'm doing. Basically, take coordinating thread that will kind of be invisible and put a knot on the end of it and thread your needle, and then you're just going to kind of whip stitch, kind of stitch through, hand stitch it closed so that nothing leaks out. And then once you've got that done, you have your pincushion ready to go. I am going to go do that with mine, and then we'll move on to getting things wrapped up here shortly. Forgot to mention something. Sorry, guys. After you get your front and your back of your pincushion sewn together, you're going to want to trim your corners. Yep, easiest thing to do, get your rotary cutter out, trim, making sure you don't hit your seam. I always just cut off an angle, but then I also kind of do another cut that's angled also. Yep, that I get kind of an easier point here to make it easier to turn and not have chunky corners. Now this one, making sure I'm cutting off the right, looking at the right seam because I put basting stitch on my other. Oops. And of course, don't get too fast on this and do something silly with fingers. Okay, so there we go. Then, as I mentioned, you're gonna flip it inside out, and here's where the purple thing comes in really handy. You're gonna flip it inside out, get the purple thing in there, and get those corners punched out. This purple thing is awesome for that. It's got two ends, it's got another end that's not quite so pointed, whichever one works for you. So you're just gonna go in there and pump out those corners. Yep. There we go. All right, so now you're ready to fill it with whatever you're filling it with. I would also, at this point in time, take it to the iron and get these seams pressed in. It's easier to do it now, obviously, before you start trying to fill it. So take it to the iron and press those so you've got a nice edge on it, and then go fill it with whatever you're gonna fill it with. I've always also filled mine with rice once in a while. So you've got that, get that filled, and then whip stitch the edge, and your pincushion top is done. And I might not actually finish that one because I'm not sure I'm gonna use it, but there we go. Now we need to put the binding around the caddy. And right now I would suggest that you do this next. As I mentioned, I'm not sure I'm gonna put my pincushion on this second one that I'm making. Either way, it doesn't matter because we can get the binding and everything done on it. Then you can take it to the ironing board and put it on there, do some measuring, and figure out exactly where the best place is to put that pincushion if you decide you need a pincushion. Okay, so you cut your 2.5 inch strips of your accent fabric. For me, that was my purple. And and I've got more than 3 lengths of them, 3 strips, because I have a longer caddy that I'm doing. So yes, you could sew your strips together and just put them just like this. So basically, trim both ends of your binding strips, making sure they're nice and even. And you could put them together like this, right sides together, and stitch your 1/4 inch. Personally, I prefer doing my binding at an angle. It means there's less bulk at each place where we're connecting fabric. So line up the top of, so there you've got your first strip. Take your next strip, right sides together, and set it right there on top, matching the top edge, matching your corners, having everything nice and matched up. Then take a ruler. Here's where it's handy. My Omni Grid ruler has my 45-degree angle, so I can put it right on the edge of the top strip. Right here's the edge. Put the ruler with the 45-degree angle right on that edge. The corner of the ruler is at the very top where it intersects with the top of the binding. Get my fusion pen out or any marking pen. This is not going to be visible. And mark your 45-degree angle. This angle here, by doing it this way, should hit exactly the corner of the binding strip that you can't see. I take that off and I pin it. Do that and create a long strip of all your binding pieces together, however you decide you want to sew them together. Okay, so I've already moved on from that. So then when you get done, it's going to look like this. Yep, nice thing there, and you've got your fabric on the back. So usually I press it first and then use either my shears at the ironing board, or I come back here to the cutting table and I put my ruler on it. I put the 1/4 inch line on my seam and cut off that triangle that I've got there. That then goes into my little basket of leaders. You know, I probably could start throwing them away by now because I think I have enough, but I need to save them. So there we go. Now you press all of those nice and neat, and then you take your entire strip and you're gonna fold it in half. So you've got a 2.5 inch strip and you're gonna take it to the ironing board and just fold it in half and press it the entire length of your binding. Now, one end of your binding, you're going to want to have an angle. A V? I was trying to figure out what to call it. An angle, that this is how I now have done my binding lately. That's really helpful. So what I do is I take the end of my binding, and this is the end of the binding that I want to start with. So let's pull this out. So here's my thing. So for me, I'm going to sew here. I'm going to start my binding here. So we're going to put our binding on here, and this is where I want my angle to be to start with. So it doesn't matter which direction you go, but basically you want to fold this corner in at an angle and just create a, well, yeah, let's see if I can just fold down the edge of the binding and get an angle there. Take it to the ironing board and press that, and then we want to get rid of the bulk. So we're gonna, just like we did with our seams on our binding, there we go, we're gonna cut that off. And normally I would have pressed this, so I'm gonna have to go back to the ironing board and press it. But there we go. So this is gonna be the start of our binding. Now, after you get everything pressed and ready to go, you're gonna put this on your caddy. Raw sides together. Yep. And then this is here. Yep. Now, don't start sewing up here. You need to leave this open, because what's gonna happen, we're gonna sew this all the way around the edges, and I need enough room to stick the end of this side that finishes into there so that it all looks nice and neat, and then we'll hand stitch that. Okay, so for binding, we're gonna stitch around there, and then we get to the edge. We get to the edge. There we go. We're at the edge here. Stop a 1/4 inch from the edge. Then, and it's not going to be this awkward when you actually have stuff stitched. You're going to stop. You're stitching a 1/4 inch seam. You're going to stop a 1/4 inch from the edge and backstitch. Then you're going to fold this up. So this edge matches up with there, and then fold it back down. Yep. So you kind of create a little square in there, and then when you're going to start sewing and pin it, then you're going to start sewing again. You're going to start sewing a 1/4 inch down from that corner. You're going to do that all the way around to the edge, and then I'll show you how to wrap it up when you're done with that. Now that I have the binding done all the way around, we're at the end. Okay, so this is where I started with my angle, and I made sure I left, I didn't start sewing until about here. Now, this end, I stopped here. What we're going to do now is we want to put this piece of fabric in there to make it nice and neat. Now, normally what I do is I fold this over, I lay it here. I'm making sure I'm past the edge of that fold in the binding. I make sure that's good, and then I clip it. I clip that end and I clip it at an angle. So as you can see, that end I cut off. I just need to make sure it overlaps so I don't cut it and go, oops, I cut it too short. Now, then we're gonna hold that over there and we're gonna slip it under there. Slide it in there. And this is why you wanna make sure that you leave enough room over here that you can do this little stuff. There we go. Now it's nice and neat and in there. Usually I use a pin and tuck that up a little and pin it. Yep, make sure that that all stays nice and secure, and then you're ready to do the final stitch of the binding from where you stopped to where you started, and then it's all in there. Then we press it all. Now that you have the binding completely sewn on and you've pressed it to the outside there, this one thing here, you're gonna have an opening there. So get out your needle and thread. I know, a little bit of handwork here, and you're gonna just kind of whip stitch that to secure it, and you're good to go. And yeah, so very similar to what you did on your pincushion to secure that edge. Then, so once you get that done, then you've pressed your binding out. Now, we're gonna flip it over. Now, I used to do all of my binding by hand. Yep, I always felt that that was the nicest, it looked the best, and everything else. But you know what? Not everybody's good at handwork. And number two, it takes a stinking long time. And I've discovered for a lot of projects, it's really not worth all that time. And with some practice, this method works very well. What you're gonna do is flip over your caddy so the back is up. You've pressed your binding out. So now you're gonna just wrap that binding over the edge, making sure it covers just a tad past. I'm gonna get my trusty mini clips out. So it covers the seam. And then I use my binding clips. If you don't have handy dandy binding clips, go get some. I got the link below. But if you don't, that's all right. Use a pin, because in this scenario of doing this, you're gonna need this secured. You're not gonna just be able to wing this. So basically, I start at one corner. I have that corner up like that. I continue to put my binding clips on all the way around, okay? And the reason why you need to make sure that when you wrap that binding over that it covers that seam is because once you get all your binding clips or your pins on there, then we're gonna flip it over and you're gonna take it to the sewing machine and you're going to stitch in the ditch. Find some coordinating thread so it's nice and discreet, or if you've got the invisible thread, it's kind of invisible thread that you can't really see. I have a tendency to go with smoke, the smoke colored fiber thread. It's not fiber, what's it called? Anyway, I'll put a link to it below. The smoke has a tendency to not reflect the light, and so I find I prefer that over completely clear. But either way, get some thread, get your walking foot out if at all possible. And with a lot of these layers here, A walking foot really is better for this project because at this point in time, let's see, you have binding bottom, binding top, 2 layers of pockets, batting, and 2 layers of caddy. You've got a lot of layers of fabric, so it's kind of going to be heavy. But then get your needle and put it right down in the corner, in the seam, and get started. And then what I do is just as I move along, I take my clips out and I sew in the ditch. Then on the back here, this should be nice and secured, stitched right there. Will it be perfect and an even seam? Probably not. The more practice you do on folding it and doing it, the better off you'll be. And every once in a while, when I first started, not when I first started, even now, I'll flip it to the back and go, oh, sugar, I didn't quite get the seam caught up. You can do one of 2 things. Either get the binding, move it down a little, secure it more, and stitch it down from the top again, or do a little bit of handwork if that works for you, whichever is easiest. Remember, this is going to be on the back. Nobody's going to see it, well, except you when you flip it up and down. But in general, nobody's going to see it. So this is the most efficient and secure method of putting on your binding. So I am going to do that and get all the way around and get my binding on. Okay, I have the binding completely on. So basically the iron caddy is done, except if you want to put the pincushion on. So placement of the pincushion, you're going to need to go figure it out. So take your caddy over to your ironing board, get the tools that you want to put in your pocket, and do some positioning of it such that you have it on the ironing board and this is located at a proper distance down from the top that you can reach what you're putting in it and they don't hang over the top and that it lays out well. Then once you have it there, take a fusion marker. These work fabulous for this. And get your, I'm going to grab the other pincushion from my other one that I did. Grab your pincushion and lay it on your ironing board where you think you want it. Take a look, figure it out. And then you go, you know what? I think right there's good. And actually what I did was I took my ruler then and I measured, and the perfect spot for me is about 7.5 inches up from the top of my pocket. Now, with that said, remember, I chopped 1 inch off my pocket because I wanted it shorter. So maybe the proper distance for you is going to be 6.5 inches. I don't know. And of course, I've got a large ironing board. So get this on your ironing board and figure out where you want to position the pocket, and then you can mark where you want to position your pincushion. So I put a mark that's where I want. I get the other side of my hook and loop tape, and as I said, this is really handy. It's got sticky on the back. So you're gonna then take that, position it where you want your pincushion to be, take off the sticky back, slap that on there, and then take it to the sewing machine and sew all the way around it and secure it with back stitching. And then you're done because your pincushion has the other side on it and it'll stick there. And then, hey, if you decide not to use it, that's fine. You can just pull your pincushion off and leave it. And so for me, I think for now, I may go fill that pincushion, but I'm not going to put the sticky tape on it because, well, it'll just collect thread and whatever. And if I'm not going to use it, well, that's kind of silly. And maybe after having this on my ironing board for a while, I decide, you know, that could be really handy to have that pincushion, so I'll put it on because it doesn't matter the way you position it. You can add it at the end. And with that said, we have our ironing board caddy done. You got a small pocket on one end and a large pocket on the other, and hopefully you've got your pockets the way you want and it works fabulous. So there we have it. Well, now that you've got your ironing board caddy done, I'm going to give you a little bonus here. Friend and subscriber Alicia asked about creating I guess you'd call it an armchair couch caddy. And the first thing I thought is, that seems very similar to my ironing board caddy. So she saw it on Amazon and she's thinking, oh, cripes, do I want to pay that much for that? I'm sure I can make one of these. So I'm going to just walk you through how I took the concept of the ironing board caddy and translated it into making an armchair caddy. And you're going to have to kind of go with me on this one because it's not finished. I'm wrapping it up as I go. The trickiest thing that we realized, my husband and I, as we were talking about this, is that you've got to have a weight on one end of the caddy to balance what you're putting in the pockets. With your ironing board, you're not putting a lot of heavy stuff, and it's a flat surface that drops, and so it doesn't have the whole issue of. Now, granted, I have a leather couch, so it's going to be slippery. If you have a fabric couch, you might not end up as big of a problem. But the picture in Amazon showed putting a laptop or a tablet in here. I have a Microsoft Surface, and I'm not so sure I would trust this to put that in here and have the weight of that and not have it slide off. But we shall see. So here's what I did. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because basically the concepts are the same as you just did for the ironing board caddy. You're going to get 2 pieces of fabric for your front and your back. I have a brown leather couch. I didn't want this to stand out, so I picked a brown fabric that matches it. And I just used the same on the front and the back. And you've got your batting in the middle. So make your back just like you did for your ironing board caddy. I quilted it exactly the same. Right now, I've trimmed it down and it's about 27 inches. I started with it at about 30 or so, maybe a little more, so that I could then get it mostly done like this, put it on the couch, measure, figure out where I needed to cut it at this end, so I had plenty of wiggle room. The last thing you want to do is not give yourself enough room and then have all this done and go, oh, it's too short, because you can't make it longer, but you could always trim it. Okay, so we got our back done. The other thing I pointed out was that my couch is leather. Therefore, it's going to slide. I was a little concerned about that, even though we're going to put some weights here at the bottom. So what I did is I still happen to have some non-slip stuff from another project. I did have to piece it. I didn't have quite enough. But I took this I took this after I had my pockets on, back to the couch and figured out where it laid over the arm of my couch and then marked it and figured out, okay, that's where I need to put some non-slip stuff to help it grip and not slip. I cut it and then I just basted it to the edges because the binding's going to wrap that up. I then also whip stitched it here and here. I thought later, maybe I should have put that on before I did my quilting. I think you're going to run into problems trying to have this non-slip stuff on when you're doing the quilting. So I would recommend you just go with that and then whip stitch it quick. It's going to be on the back. Okay, pockets. This has 2 layers of pockets. A larger pocket in the back. This is where potentially your tablet, if you're brave enough to put your tablet in it. Or for me, it's where my Kindle is going to go. And then I made a front pocket that has 3 smaller pockets. So my phone would fit in there, some pens. Oftentimes I have a mouse for my computer that's on my end table. So maybe some of those things I can get off my end table and put in here. Headsets, if I'm trying to listen to an audiobook while Kevin's watching TV. Okay, you're gonna wanna kind of figure out what you wanna put in your pockets and figure out the height you want. I didn't want stuff to get lost in here, So I made it short enough such that I think my Kindle will still stick out. My tablet will definitely stick out. And then my phone would stick out here. Okay? So I ended up going with a cut backing of 13.5 inches, meaning I'll have 13 inches after the binding and everything goes on. So my back pocket, I made 8 by 13.5. So remember, when doing the ironing board caddy, your front fabric is the smaller piece, like your 8 by 13.5. And then you have another piece, for me, I use the brown, that is an inch larger, 9 by 13.5. And then you make your pocket just like you did with your ironing board caddy. So this pocket is 8 by 13.5, and this is 6 by 13.5. Remember, when you're measuring and figuring things out, to consider your 1/2 inch for your seam here, or 1/2 inch total for your seam allowances. Get your back pocket done. Get your front pocket done. Then, if you want to subdivide your front pocket, put it on your back pocket and figure out your markings to subdivide it. Do not have it on the backing yet, or you're going to end up subdividing your back pocket too. So do your back pocket, put your front pocket on it, and then you're subdividing. Then put your pockets that are now connected together to your backing. Okay, then what I would recommend we do at this point is put on the binding, and I'm going to go do that, because here's what we're going to do is, and I cut this wrong. I didn't take into consideration my 1/2 inch for my seams. But the concept is, I cut a piece of fabric 6 by 13.5 and a piece of stabilizer. Easiest thing to do is if you have a steam-a-seam iron-on like Ultra Bond or something, that would work fabulous. I had machine embroidery stabilizer that I used, a little stiffer than I probably needed, but I'm going to put something in there for a weight to help balance this. So I took that fabric, it was 6 by 13.5. I sewed it right sides together and sewed just one seam. Hang on here. I had it right sides together and sewed one seam. And then I opened it up, flipped it inside out, and then I folded it so my seam is in the center of the back, so it's completely hidden. Then, after we have our binding on, my plan is, and I'm going to come back and show you this, is to put this here in such a way that we can baste it right where your binding went on. So we're going to secure one end. We're not going to secure the other end, because this way we have an opening to put in the stuff to make it heavy. And then we can lay it down and finish it off here. Haha, no handwork involved. Is a good thing. And then I'm also thinking I need to stitch it here somehow so it doesn't interfere with the binding. So we're going to get that figured out, and I'll be back. I have my binding on. I put it on just like I did for the ironing board caddy. So I've got that on all the way around. Okay, I also redid my little bag that we're going to put at the bottom. It is now 6 by 13.5. And as I said, I pressed it with the seam in the middle. Okay, so now here's what I'm envisioning. Okay, I am going to keep that binding folded back, and I'm going to come over here and put my little, we're going to call it my end pocket here at the end. Now, I don't want it clear at the end here, because when my binding gets folded over, it's going to get sewn, and I don't want that necessarily right there. But we do want to secure it. So I'm actually going to nudge it down a little so that actually when I do my binding and fold it over, that bag will get caught in it in the seams. And so I'm going to stitch all the way around, just like I did with my iron-on caddy. I'm going to secure this up here, so that's going to lock that end and close the hole in it. Then we're going to wrap this around, and I'm going to put that there so I suck in and secure part of the edge of that little pocket we've got. Then the key thing is I'm going to stop here. I am not going to stitch up that. In fact, I probably won't even stitch this side. I'll just leave it open because this is the hole that we're going to use to fill the pocket with something heavy. And now as I'm seeing this, I'm thinking, I might also sew this down. Yes, that means I'm going to have a seam on this side, kind of like my quilting. I don't see a problem with that. This is going to be hidden underneath. So it's going to be it's going to be on your hip at that level. So nobody's going to see it. But I feel like I need to secure this further here. Then, once I have that done, then we're going to fill this with something. Now, I've been trying to figure out what to do. The stuff that we put in the pincushion pocket, it really doesn't have enough weight that's going to help balance whatever I might put in the pockets here. And I thought about rice, but even that. And then I got to thinking, I know this is going to be really weird, and I can't remember what I bought this for before, but I bought Daisy BBs. I know there was another project like 5 years ago or so that I needed something that I was going to put in that I was going to need to weight down. I'm thinking it was the little bag that I have where I put my needle or my pins and a catch-all for my threads, and I needed something to hold that down. What we ended up using was a tile, a flat tile, because that's all the weight it needed. This is going to need a little more weight to it. These things are kind of heavy, so we're going to give it a try. I actually have 2 containers. These are 2,400 count BBs, 4.5 millimeter. Yeah. So we're going to see how this works because I really think we need something fairly heavy. What will be interesting is when I get it done is if it, gets in the way of my hip when I'm sitting on the couch. So stay tuned here. We're going to make progress with this. And you know what? You might end up watching this and go, oh gosh, I'm just going to buy this caddy from Amazon. So stay tuned and we'll see what we get. Okay, I have my little pocket in here. Key thing is what I would do actually is probably put that pocket all the way to the bottom. I found even though I thought it had it down far enough when I wrapped the binding, it didn't quite catch it. So I would put it all the way to the bottom and possibly then before you wrap the binding up, stitch that down in the seam there so you know it's secured. Then I wrap my binding over it. So we've got this end secured, that end secured. And then I just took, and by the way, all of this is being done with my walking foot. And then right along the edge, I stitched it down. So basically it's securing this pocket very well. So if we look over here on this side, I've just got a nice seam. Everything looks very nice from the side that you're going to see. Okay, now I have this pocket, this bag of BBs, and as you can see, this edge here is open. So it's open, but both these sides are secured. So I'm gonna take my BBs and I'm gonna, because I just used a stabilizer that's not ironed on, I wanna make sure that I'm gonna get this in there. So I am going to take these and put them all in here. Then I will want to make sure it's loose enough such that I can fold over this final binding and secure it and stitch it. That way, my pocket that has my weights in it is going to be completely secured. There's nothing loose or flapping or whatever. And I'm really hoping I made this big enough so it's going to give me enough weight. If you're concerned and you want to make it bigger, then, cut it 7 inches by your width instead of 6. So we're playing with this. We're figuring it out for Alicia. And here we have it. What I did was filled it up. I used only one container of the BBs. I think if I felt I needed 2, I would definitely want to make this sleeve, this pocket for the weights to be bigger. Otherwise this would bulge out quite a bit. I took it upstairs and put it on my couch, and yes, it holds nicely. Because of the way my couch is, there's kind of an indentation that this can go into, so I don't feel it's bumping against my hip with a weight. And it holds nicely, as you can see there. And then I can put my mouse in there. My phone can go in there. My Kindle. Oops, yep, my Kindle is gonna get lost in there. It's not quite deep enough to keep that out. But my Microsoft Surface does, get that out of there, does slide in there nicely, and it seemed to be strong enough to hold it. Would I be comfortable leaving it there if I was not sitting in the couch where, when you're sitting in the couch, you've got your arm on the rest and then this holding it. So I was completely comfortable having it there. If I'm not sitting there, not sure I would trust it. The other thing is I have a case and a keyboard that goes around my Surface, which adds a lot more weight. That is not gonna fit. It's also, if I wanted to do that, I should have made it wider. So there we have it. It was a bit interesting to do, but this gives you an idea of what can be done once you know how to make the ironing board caddy. So you've got some ideas for other things you could do with it. Yeah, and getting this pocket on the bottom was kind of interesting. So there you have it. You might just want to go to Amazon and buy it if you really want one. On the other hand, if you're using this caddy more for your handwork, a box of needles, your scissors, those kind of things that are more lightweight, you might just find this perfect for your needs, and then you could use some pretty fabric and it'll be just fine. So I'll be interested to know if any of you decide to do this couch caddy and how it turned out for you. So there you go, a little bit extra on this video for you. Take care and have a great day. Thank you so much for watching. I very much appreciate it. If you want to make sure you don't miss a single video I published, hit the subscribe button below and then hit the bell icon. And that way you will be notified whenever I publish a new video. But you can also find me over on Facebook, facebook.com/Wendy, the initial J, Haney. Or I have a Facebook group for those of you that love quilting, needlework, books, wine, and wellness. You can find that at facebook.com/groups/lifefulfilled. The name of the group is Life Fulfilled - Quilting, Needlework, Books, Wine, and Wellness. You can also find me over on my website, wendyjhaney.com. I will be doing more blogging over there eventually. As I get more of my videos done, I'll be blogging about those. But also, maybe you see some things that I'm making here and you're going, ooh, wow, I just don't want to make that myself. Well, a lot of those products will end up over there on the website that you can purchase for your friends and family. Once again, thank you so much for your support, and I appreciate you watching.